Hi, my name is Tom. I'm with Baltimore County Master Gardeners. I'm here to talk to you about growing vegetables in containers. In the past, we would have this presentation at a local public library, but today we're going to do this remotely. So let's get started. First, a quick note about Master Gardeners. It is a program within the University of Maryland Extension, which is in turn part of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Master Gardeners are volunteers, but we are trained by faculty and staff in order to provide educational outreach, such as this video. This presentation is brought to you by Grow It Eat It, a Master Gardener program that has a mission to help Marylanders grow food in a safe and sustainable way. My Aunt Martha grew a lot of things in her backyard, but as she got older, much of her garden migrated onto her back porch, into containers, like this one, and for good reason. Not only were the plants more accessible and easier to maintain, but they were something that she could easily see and enjoy, since they were only a few steps from her kitchen door. For many Marylanders, container gardening may be the best option for vegetable gardening. We'll begin by talking about the advantages and disadvantages. Then we'll move on to how to start and maintain a container vegetable garden. Why grow veggies in containers? First of all, it's easy. Container gardening is a good way to start, whether it be for children or novices. It's also a good alternative for a seasoned gardener that is looking to downsize. It's inexpensive because many items can be reused as containers. Sure, you may decide to spend more money on containers, but often that is for the sake of convenience. You may choose to buy potting soil or some other growing medium, but you'll likely be spending less than if you were purchasing amendments for a new in-ground or raised bed garden. Containers are more accessible because they can be put into places that are easier to get to. Sometimes even the most enthusiastic gardener may not be willing to tromp across the rain-soaked yard to get some herb clippings, but they would be willing to visit a more conveniently located container. Container gardening may be a good option for folks with physical limitations, or for those who may not have access to an area that would otherwise be used for more conventional gardening. This may include folks that live in apartments or condominiums, but it could also include folks who have yards but no place to put a garden or do not have good soil to grow in. Why is it good to be portable? This might be the most compelling advantage. Being able to move your vegetables allows you better control of their environment. It is easier to make sure the plants get enough light. It is easier to protect the plants from extreme weather and unwelcome critters. It also lets you begin earlier in the spring by starting sensitive plants indoors or a sheltered location, take them outside in late spring and summer, and then extend the growing season into fall by moving them back inside again. However, containers do require more frequent watering. This can be made less of a hassle if you choose a location convenient to a water source, or if you use a self-watering container. Vegetables grown in containers will have their limitations. Don't expect to grow an 8-inch carrot in a 6-inch pot. You'd be surprised how many vegetables can grow in containers, but you may have to settle for bush, dwarf, or patio varieties. Okay, I know you're saying to yourself, Tom, you really sold me. What do I need to do to get started? We'll spend some time talking about these 4 considerations for starting a vegetable garden. When considering where to put your containers, make sure that they are in a convenient location. This will help you to keep an eye out for problems before they get out of hand. You'll be more inclined to do routine maintenance and visit your containers when foraging for the kitchen. Make sure that they are near a source of water, otherwise you probably won't be watering as often as you should. Be mindful of drainage. Regular overflow from containers can cause stains or damage to whatever the container is sitting on. It sounds silly to be concerned about container weight, but a 20-inch container filled with moist growing medium can weigh 100 pounds. This might influence the size and type of container that you want to use. Last but not least, will you receive enough sunlight? Tomatoes, peppers, and beans need around 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, whereas leafy greens like spinach and lettuce may be able to manage with only 5 hours. Carrots, radishes, and beets are somewhere in between. Choosing a sunny spot is probably the most important aspect of any garden's location. We live in the northern hemisphere. The sun doesn't rise in the east and set in the west. It rises just a little south of east and sets at a little southwest. Even at noontime, it's not directly above, but just a little to the south. That's why your garden needs a good southern exposure. If your house faces the south and you have a small yard, then your backyard may not be the best place for your garden. That's the great thing about containers. You can put them wherever the sun is, even on your front porch or driveway. If you put your containers next to each other, it's a good idea to have them go from east to west so that your plants will not shade each other as they grow. The tallest plants, like tomatoes, should be on the north side of the group so that they do not keep the sun from reaching the other plants. What can be used as a container? Bins, barrels, bottles, buckets, baskets, bags, boxes, boots. You can even use something that doesn't begin with the letter B. In fact, almost any container can be used for growing vegetables, as long as it has good drainage and won't cause the soil to dry out too quickly. I once met someone who grew his tomatoes in a canoe. The tomatoes were doing well, so he must have had good drainage in the bottom of the canoe. Good thing he wasn't fishing in it. Without good drainage, water will accumulate and cause root rot. If you decide to use a container that does not have holes on the bottom, be prepared to put them in yourself. It also helps to have a tray under the container. This allows excess water to be wicked back up. It can also help prevent staining of the surface beneath the container. Dark colors will create higher temperatures that could injure young tender roots and prevent the full development of the plant's root system. Containers from a nursery are cheap and durable, but they tend to be black and do not have a tray to collect the drainage. If you use them, shade the containers, but not the plants, and be sure to add a drainage tray. Containers made from porous materials like clay, ceramic, concrete, and wood will dry out more quickly than containers made from plastic or metal. Herbs such as lavender, thyme, oregano, marjoram, and chives actually do better in porous clay pots like terracotta. Vegetables, on the other hand, do better in something that won't wick away the soil moisture. Here are some more examples. Repurposed bins make great containers when holes are drilled in the bottom for drainage. Note how the bin lids are used as trays. In the upper right, we see a flower pot that can be used to grow veggies. Here, a tomato cage is used to provide support for a squash plant. On the bottom, we have two special kinds of containers. On the left, we see a salad table. This is essentially a shallow wooden frame with a mesh bottom that allows water to drain. It's great for growing lots of leafy greens, beets, and radishes. The University of Maryland Home and Garden Information Center has a publication that explains how you can make your own salad table or even a small salad box. On the right, we see examples of self-watering containers. They have a drainage hole on the side instead of the bottom. The growing medium sits on a perforated platform above a water reservoir. Water is wicked up from the reservoir into the growing medium. Self-watering containers help conserve water and nutrients and make it possible to ignore your containers for a few days. The Home and Garden Information Center has a publication that shows how you can make one of these as well. Soil is made of particles of different things that are either mineral or organic. These particles are all jiggity-jaggedy and knobbly-wobbly. Do they fit together well? No! Is this a good thing? Yes, because this results in pore space, or holes between the particles, that provide room for air and water. Other properties of the soil determine nutrient levels and how well the soil will hold on to nutrients so that they do not simply wash away the first time you overwater your plants. Before we begin to discuss soil options for containers, it's best to define some vocabulary words first. Topsoil. Is this good? Top shelf, top notch, topsoil. Must be good, right? Not necessarily. Topsoil can be the filter that the contractor put around your house after they laid the foundation. It contains few nutrients and compacts easily. Garden soil. There are two kinds. The commercial kind that you buy and the stuff that you might dig up from your in-ground garden. Neither one is good by itself for container gardening. They don't provide the drainage needed for containers and can cause roots to drown. Soil from your garden can hold diseases and weed seeds that will hurt the plants in your containers. Garden soil can be heavy. This may be an advantage if you're trying to anchor top-heavy plants in pots, but a disadvantage if you want to move the pots later. Like topsoil, garden soil is also subject to compaction. Garden soil is best used in raised gardens or in-ground gardens, but not in containers. Potting soil. Now we're getting somewhere. It contains soil, but typically contains a mix of other ingredients to add nutrients, adjust pH, and improve drainage. Soilless mixes. These are an excellent choice for containers. They are lightweight, they drain well, and they hold on to water and nutrients. Typically, they are comprised of sphagnum, peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite. It may also contain fertilizer and small amounts of lime to give it a good pH. They're generally free of weeds, insects, and diseases. Compost. This is organic matter that is derived from decayed plant material. It typically contains materials that were high in nitrogen and carbon, but may have low amounts of other nutrients as well. It can be purchased or made at home in your compost pile. So, with that said, what is the best soil option for containers? Soilless mixes and potting soil are at the top of the list, but you can also use compost or a combination. Topsoil and garden soils are not recommended for containers. Topsoil does not have the necessary nutrients, and both are subject to compaction. Sand by itself is not good either. It doesn't have nutrients and cannot retain water. Garden soil and sand can be used to amend soil texture. If you're using garden soil, do not use more than 25% if you're mixing it with soilless mix or compost. You may not want to use it at all if you're mixing it with potting soil, since potting soil already contains, well, soil, and adding more may lead to compaction. Not all vegetables and herbs might benefit from the rich, moist soil that comes out of a bag from the nursery. Vegetables like carrots and parsnips, and herbs like lavender, thyme, oregano, marjoram, and chives require a looser growing medium and drier conditions. Sand is a good amendment here, but make sure to use builder's sand or sharp sand, not play sand. Play sand is too fine. When you work with soil, think about, would I want to grow in this? As you get more experience with gardening, you'll be surprised with how well you'll be able to answer this question. You can tell by looking at the soil if it will be able to provide good aeration and drainage. We'll be covering nutrients later. Normally, it's best to replace container soil annually, but you may be able to get some more use out of it if the previous occupants did not have diseases or pests. Be aware that the nutrients will have leached out or have been used up during the previous year. Therefore, the nutrients will be a mere shadow of what they once were, and you will need to replenish them. Make sure that the soil has not become compacted. This is what happened to the soil in the previous slide. Organic media weathers over time, causing a decrease in the size of particles in pore spaces or holes. This may slow water drainage and root growth. If you plan to reuse soil, it's a good idea to remove it from the containers at the end of the season and store it away from the winter elements. What to do with the old container soil? If it's not diseased but is no longer good for containers, I use it to amend the topsoil in another part of my yard. This allows me to ultimately build up other areas for pollinator and herb gardens. If you are thinking of growing a particular vegetable in a container, first consider where you might put the container. Will there be enough light for that vegetable? Will the vegetable need additional support from a stake, cage, or trellis? What size container will I need, and will it fit in the available space? The good news is that most vegetables are suitable for containers, but you may have to make some sacrifices. Don't expect to grow an 8-inch carrot in a 6-inch pot. You'll need to match the container to the type of plant. We'll talk about this in a bit. Don't squeeze large plants into small containers. This will restrict root growth too much and the plants don't grow well. A general rule of thumb is that for every 2 feet that a plant grows up, it will need 1 foot for the roots to grow down. Vegetables such as tomatoes and cucumbers have patio, bush, and dwarf varieties that are bred for small spaces. More challenging crops include melons, corn, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, so you probably don't want to start with these. Some vegetables are best grown from seed, while others are best grown from transplants. There are times when you may be able to choose between seeds or transplants, depending upon the type of vegetable and your level of expertise. This is the first of 3 Goldilocks scenarios to show the ideal depth of the container to be used for different vegetables and herbs. These plants have shallow roots and the containers need only to be 4 to 6 inches deep. They are largely herbs and leafy greens, however there are some short root vegetables. Although you may not need to worry as much about the depth of the container in this case, you may need to consider the spread of the plant. If Goldilocks were to grow vegetables and herbs with larger root systems, she should use a container that is 8 to 12 inches deep, corresponding to a 1 to 3 gallon pot. This list contains bush beans and patio varieties of tomatoes and cucumbers. The list also includes peppers and eggplants, since they are not as large as a big tomato bush. If Goldilocks wanted to grow vegetables with deep roots, she would need something over 12 inches deep, corresponding to 4 or 5 gallons or more. If she were to be planting multiple plants, she should be careful not to crowd them in, or they will compete with each other. Now that we've selected the right location, the container, and the soil, we can now plant our vegetables. If you are working with a large container, it may make sense to place the container in the selected location before filling it with soil. Don't forget about the drainage tray, although you may not need one if you decide to dig a small hole in your garden and bury the bottom of the container. This helps to retain moisture in the pot. Using a container like this is a good way to keep aggressive plants, like mint, from running amok in your garden. Cover the drainage holes to prevent soil from washing away. Do not fill the bottom with pebbles, gravel, or rocks unless you need the additional weight to keep the container from tipping, in which case you might have wanted to use a wider container in the first place. Soilless mixes, particularly those containing peat moss, are sometimes difficult to water initially. Water tends to roll off the surface. It is much easier to add water to a soilless mix after it is damp. Prior to planting, thoroughly work water into the growing medium. You may want to do this in a bucket before putting it in the container. Fill the container within an inch of the rim. This will make it easier to water later. If you fill it to the top, the water will run off all over the place and make a mess. Do not compress the soil. Remember the holes between the soil particles. We want to make sure that they remain so that there is enough room for air and water in the soil. If you are planting seeds, be sure to follow the instructions on the seed packet for seed depth and spacing. When transplanting, be sure to follow the instructions on the label. Typically, transplants should be planted so that the soil level in the new container is the same as it was in the old one. The exception to this is tomatoes. They can be planted deep because new roots will be sprouted from the length of the stem that is under the surface of the soil. Mulch can be applied after planting to help the container retain moisture. Examples of mulch include straw, chopped leaves, and compost. Tall plants like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants need staking or cages for support. When using stakes, drive the stake into the soil when the ground is moist. Tie the plant onto the stake as it grows, using thick twine or Aunt Martha's nylon stockings. Don't tie too tight or you might restrict the growth of the stems. If you choose to plant a cucumber or squash vine instead of a bush, use a wire mesh or small trellis for support. The plant will grab onto the wires, but you may need to get it started by pushing the ends of the vines through the mesh. Okay, we planted our vegetables in containers. Now is the point where we begin the process of maintaining our container garden. The first thing to consider is water. The soil should be moist but not soggy, like a damp sponge. Add water until you see it drain out of the bottom. A lot of things will determine how often you need to water. Smaller containers dry out faster than bigger ones and may need to be watered more often. You'll also need to water more often on hotter, sunnier, or less humid days. Wind really draws water out of plants. Even though your enthusiasm may wane during the summer months, it's especially important to keep up regular watering, even when you go on vacation. If you don't have self-watering containers, you may want to ask a neighbor to water for you. Irrigation systems are another option. They are efficient, convenient, and relatively inexpensive. You can even water automatically with a timer. If plants are allowed to wilt, it will take some time for them to recover. Drought stress kills feeder roots and will slow the plant down. This will impact your harvest. Not only will the plant have less time to produce during the growing season, but the quality of the harvest may suffer as well. When watering, remember to water the roots and not the leaves. Be careful not to splash, otherwise diseases that live on the surface of the soil may be splashed onto the other sides of the leaves where they can become a problem. Finally, don't water at night because this may encourage diseases like mildew. We've just mentioned how wind can suck the moisture out of your plants. With a little help from Isaac Asimov and George Washington, I intend to show you how this happens. As air passes over the top of the dollar bill, It creates suction on the far side, causing that side of the dollar bill to raise up. This force, called lift, is the same force that is generated when air passes over the wing of an airplane. If it can keep planes from falling out of the sky, imagine what it is doing to the moisture in your plants. After a windy day, be sure to check on them to see if they need watering. Just as plants need air, water, and sunshine, they will also need nutrients. The basic nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is necessary for leaf growth. Phosphorus is good for root growth as well as for fruiting vegetables. Potassium is good for overall healthy growth. A good way to remember which is up, down, all around. You may see a series of numbers on a bag of fertilizer. The numbers represent the amount of each nutrient as a percentage of the fertilizer. When you use fertilizer, remember to read the instructions. Too much fertilizer can hurt plants, reduce fruiting, attract pests, and pollute waterways. How much fertilizer to use and how often? If you're looking for simple answers to these questions, you are likely to be disappointed. First of all, it depends on the type of soil that you are using. Commercially available container mixes may already have fertilizer in them, but this may need to be supplemented if the vegetable is a long season one or is a heavy feeder. Remember that different vegetables have different needs, particularly when it comes to levels of macronutrients. Nitrogen is good for leafy vegetables, but be careful not to add too much or they can taste bitter. Phosphorus is good for fruiting vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, or squash, as well as root vegetables like carrots and beets. Consider also that the type of fertilizer also makes a difference, not only in the quantity of the macronutrients, but also in the speed with which they are released. Synthetic fertilizers are usually either fast-acting soluble plant foods that are mixed with water, or slow-release pellets. Compost and organic fertilizers can also be used. They may have a lower level of nutrients, but release them over a longer period of time. Don't forget about the pH of the soil. This determines how readily a plant can obtain nutrients. The good news is that many commercially available container mixes for vegetables are adjusted to have a pH that is good for most vegetables. Such mixes will have sufficient nutrients initially, but will likely need to be supplemented later on. If you're using commercial fertilizer, be sure to use one that is intended for vegetables. Lawn fertilizers contain little to no phosphorus, which is important for fruiting or rooting vegetables. When applying commercial fertilizer, always follow the instructions on the label. If you like to pull weeds, you are likely to be disappointed with containers. However, the rest of us are happy that we don't have to do so as much. Little weeding is required with containers, particularly if you cover the surface of the soil with mulch. Container-grown plants are subject to the same insect and disease problems as container-grown plants. Nonetheless, you'll likely have fewer problems than if you were growing your vegetables in an in-ground garden. Pests and diseases that overwinter in the soil will be less of a problem, particularly if you replace the soil annually. Remember that diseases can build up on the inside of a container, so it makes sense to clean it at the end of each year with a mild bleach solution. Insects will still come to visit the vegetables in your containers. They're not picky. But any other problems will likely be something that's in your control. We've already mentioned the evils of underwatering. However, you should also avoid overwatering as well. It can cause root rot, especially if the growing medium does not drain well. Overwatering can cause nutrients to be leached out from your container, and they can be depleted much faster than your plant can use them. Remember that it may be necessary to supplement nutrients with fertilizer or compost. Be careful not to overcrowd your container, otherwise the plants will be competing with each other for nutrients, water, and sunlight. Disease can also be more of a problem if air cannot circulate between the plants. Since containers are portable, except for the large ones, you are able to do some things to increase the yield from your container garden. For starters, you can start plants indoors while it is too cold for them outside. Many seeds won't germinate unless the soil temperature is warm enough, and many seedlings are sensitive to frost, so why not start them inside? Once plants are moved outside, you can continue to move them if and when necessary. If you realize that you put your container garden underneath a tree that is now beginning to develop leaves, you can move the containers to a sunnier spot. As seasons change, areas that may have been sunny in the spring may not be so sunny in the summer. So why not move your containers? Also, keep in mind that crops like lettuce may actually do better if they are moved to a shadier spot during the hot summer months. If you want more produce, consider succession planting. When spring lettuce and radishes are spent, pull them up and replant with pepper plants, beans, and cucumber seeds. In early fall, plant kale or lettuce to finish out the season. Remember to fertilize after each crop. Finally, at the end of the season, you can move some things indoors. Rosemary is a tender perennial and does not always survive harsh winter months. You can also extend the season for veggies such as peppers or start new seedlings such as spinach. That's it for growing vegetables in containers. We thank you for attending this presentation. If you've enjoyed this one, please keep an eye out for other presentations from Master Gardeners. For more information, visit one of the websites below. The fact sheets and publications mentioned in this presentation are available at the Home and Garden Information Center. If you'd like to learn more about Master Gardeners, please visit our website or join our mailing list, or check us out on Facebook.